Mafia boss walked through the grand hall of his mansion, cold and commanding as always, until a desperate scream shattered the silence of the night. "Don't touch her!" It was the voice of his mother's nurse, standing between the old woman and someone who should have protected her. He thought it was just a misunderstanding, but what he saw when he opened that door changed everything forever. Before we continue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because what you're about to witness will stay with you long after the story ends. That night was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of quiet that only million-dollar mansions in the suburbs of Los Angeles can hold. The clock had just struck 2 o'clock in the morning when Nathan Blackwood shoved open the door to his mother's bedroom. What he saw stopped him dead, as if someone had driven a fist straight into his chest. Victoria Ashford, the woman he was supposed to marry in just a few weeks, was gripping Eleanor Blackwood by her snow-white hair. Her face was twisted with rage, lips pressed into a hard line, eyes cold as ice. This wasn't the Victoria Nathan had known. Not the gentle, flawless woman who always made him proud whenever she appeared at his side. This was someone else entirely, a complete stranger. Right in the middle of the room, Sophia Hartley stood like a thin, fragile shield between Victoria and the elderly woman. The young woman's brown hair was hastily tied back. She was still in her nurse's uniform, her hands trembling but her feet not retreating even a single step. Her voice rose again, sharper this time, more resolute. "I told you, don't touch her." Eleanor shrank into the corner of the bed, her frail hands covering her head as if trying to protect herself from invisible blows. She cried, but without sound. Only silent tears slid down her wrinkled cheeks, soaking into her white nightgown. Her eyes, the eyes that had once shone with the authority of the most powerful woman in the Blackwood family, now held nothing but the pure terror of an abandoned child. "Enough." Nathan's voice cracked through the still night like thunder. It wasn't the voice of an ordinary man. It was the voice of someone who had once given orders to hundreds. The voice of a boss to whom the entire Los Angeles underworld had bowed its head. Victoria flinched and released Eleanor's hair. In an instant, her face changed completely. The fury vanished as if it had never existed, replaced by panic and tears spilling down her cheeks. She rushed toward Nathan, arms reaching out as if to throw them around him. "Darling, I was only trying to help your mother." She nearly fell off the bed. I tried to hold her, but she panicked and started screaming. "I swear to you, I didn't do anything wrong." Victoria's voice shook, her wide eyes brimming as she looked at Nathan with the deepest wounded innocence. On any other night, Nathan might have believed her. She acted too well, too perfectly, as if she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times in front of a mirror. But tonight, he had seen everything. He had seen her hand tangled in his mother's hair. He had seen that face contorted with hatred. "Get out," Nathan said, his voice so cold the air in the room seemed to freeze. "But darling, I need to explain." I said, "Get out." There was no room for bargaining in those words. Victoria stood rigid, lips parting as if she wanted to say more, but in the end she only lowered her head and walked out. As she passed Sophia, she shot the young nurse a look as sharp and cold as a blade, but she didn't dare speak a single word. The door closed. The room fell into silence. Sophia didn't speak, didn't defend herself, didn't explain what had just happened. She only walked quietly to Eleanor's bedside, sat down, and gently took the elderly woman's trembling hand. "It's all right, Mrs. Eleanor. It's all right. I'm here now. No one can hurt you anymore." Sophia's voice was as soft as a lullaby, like wind whispering through leaves. She stroked Eleanor's silver hair, rubbed her back with slow, steady motions. Little by little, Eleanor's body began to stop shaking. The old woman looked up at Sophia, eyes still wet, but the panic easing. Then she did something that made Nathan's throat tighten. Eleanor clung to Sophia's hand the way a child clings to her mother after a nightmare. She wrapped both arms around the nurse's arm, pressed her face into it, and wept. Not the sobbing of fear anymore, but the sobbing of relief, of someone who had finally found a place that was safe. Nathan stood in the corner of the room where the lamplight didn't reach. He watched his mother, the woman who had once been the strongest and proudest person he had ever known, now curled into the arms of a young nurse, as if that were the only shelter left in the world. He watched Sophia, slender and steady, with warm brown eyes, the girl who had stepped in front of Victoria to protect his mother without hesitation, and he wondered how long things like this had been happening under his own roof without him knowing, how long his mother had been forced to endure in silence. That night, Nathan Blackwood, the most powerful mafia boss in Los Angeles, the man who made the entire underworld tremble, felt fear for the first time. Not fear of an enemy, not fear of death, but fear that the most dangerous enemy of all had been living in his house for so long, and he had been too blind to see it. Nathan stepped out of his mother's room after Eleanor had drifted into sleep under Sophia's care. He had barely eased the door shut when he saw Victoria already waiting in the hallway. Her back against the wall, eyes reddened, her face wet with tears. She looked like a wronged victim, a fragile woman standing there in need of comfort. Nathan knew he should pull her into his arms, speak to her softly the way he always did. But tonight, he couldn't. The image of Victoria's hand gripping his mother's hair was still burned into his mind, so sharp it wouldn't fade. "Darling, I know what you're thinking, but you have to listen to my explanation." Victoria moved closer, her hands closing around Nathan's arm, her voice trembling with suffering. "That nurse hates me. She's trying to drive a wedge between me and your mother. Don't you see it? Every time I go near Mrs. Eleanor, she looks at me like I'm her enemy. Tonight was the same. I only wanted to help your mother, but she started screaming as if I were some kind of murderer." Nathan stayed silent, offering no reply. He looked at Victoria, at those wide eyes shining with tears, at her lips forming one excuse after another. Before this, he had trusted her without question. Victoria Ashford, the daughter of a distinguished family, beautiful, intelligent, perfect, down to the smallest detail. She was the kind of woman any man would want. But tonight, for the first time, Nathan wondered whether that perfection was real, or only a mask polished until it gleamed. "I think we should let her go," Victoria went on when she saw Nathan didn't react. Her tone remained gentle, but there was a hidden firmness underneath. "I'll find another nurse for your mother, someone more professional, someone who won't cause scenes like tonight. Trust me, it's what's best for everyone." Nathan met Victoria's eyes, and for the first time in their relationship, he didn't see sincerity there. "My mother needs her," Nathan said, his voice calm but icy. "This discussion ends here." Victoria's expression flickered. For a brief moment, Nathan saw something flash in her eyes. Not sadness, not hurt, but anger. The fury of someone who wasn't used to being refused, yet it vanished at once, replaced by a look of practiced resignation and false understanding. "Yes, I understand." Victoria nodded slightly, her lips curving into a strained smile. "I'm only worried about you and your mother. We'll talk later, when you've calmed down." She turned and walked down the hallway, her steps still graceful and composed, as if nothing had happened. Nathan remained where he was, watching Victoria's back as she went, and then he saw it. Sophia had just come out of Eleanor's room, maybe to get more water or a warm cloth. The young nurse stopped when she saw Victoria coming toward her. In the dim hallway light, Nathan watched Victoria slow as she drew even with Sophia. Victoria tilted her head, her lips moving as she said something very softly, so softly Nathan couldn't hear it from this distance. "Do you think you've won? Just wait," Victoria whispered, her voice cold as a snake's venom. Then she kept walking, chin lifted, as if she had just offered a polite greeting. Sophia stood frozen. Nathan couldn't make out her face in the shadows, but he saw her shoulders go rigid. He saw her hand curl into a fist at her side, knuckles turning white with the force of it. And when Sophia turned, the light spilling from the room behind her was enough for Nathan to see her eyes. Not the eyes of someone who had just been insulted. The eyes of someone who was afraid. Truly afraid. The look of someone who was used to threats like that, who had heard them often enough to know they weren't empty words. Nathan drew back into the darkness before Sophia could notice him. He stood there in silence, his mind spinning with 100 questions. What had Victoria said to her? Why was Sophia so frightened? How many times had exchanges like that happened right under his roof without him knowing? And most of all, why did a nurse who could stand up to Victoria to protect his mother have to endure in silence? That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in his hand, eyes fixed on nothing. He had built an empire on observation and sharp instincts. He had survived the brutal underworld by never trusting appearances. And yet, inside his own home, he had let everything slip past him. But that would change. From now on, he would watch, he would listen, and he would find the truth, whatever it might be. A week had passed since that fateful night. Nathan kept the promise he'd made to himself. He watched everything in silence, letting not a single small detail slip by. Victoria was still perfect as always, still gentle and attentive, still playing the role of the flawless fiancé without a single crack. But Nathan had learned how to see through that polished shell. And tonight, At the Blackwood family's annual charity gala, he would have the chance to see even more. The Blackwood mansion glowed under warm golden light. Crystal chandeliers shimmered against the soaring ceilings, their sparkle scattering across marble floors polished so bright they could serve as mirrors. Fresh flowers filled every corner, the faint perfume of roses and lilies mingling with the expensive fragrance worn by the guests. A classical ensemble played drifting waltzes in one corner of the room, creating a kind of grandeur only Los Angeles high society could truly savor. And in the middle of all that extravagance, Victoria Ashford shone like a star. She wore a vivid red gown that hugged her figure, and at her throat hung the diamond necklace Nathan had given her to mark their 6-month anniversary. Her black hair was swept into an elegant updo, revealing the graceful curve of her neck and shoulders. She moved through the crowd with a queen's poise, a smile always on her lips, her eyes glittering whenever they caught the camera's lens. The guests clustered around her like moths drawn to light. Men admired her, women envied her, everyone eager to exchange a few words with Nathan Blackwood's beautiful fiancée. Victoria received it all with perfectly crafted false modesty. "Oh, thank you for the compliment. Really, I'm only trying my best to be worthy of Nathan. He's the most wonderful man I've ever met." She said it to a middle-aged businessman, her voice sweet as honey. Then she turned to push Eleanor's wheelchair, where the elderly woman sat with a thin blanket draped over her lap. Victoria leaned down, one hand resting on Eleanor's shoulder, her radiant smile directed toward the guests. "I always care for Nathan's mother the way I would care for my own. She's an extraordinary woman. I've learned so much from her." Praise rose from all sides. The guests marveled at Victoria's devotion, at how tender and thoughtful she seemed with an elderly woman suffering from Alzheimer's. No one saw the way Victoria's fingers dug hard into Eleanor's shoulder. No one heard the small moan that was swallowed by music and laughter. Nathan stood beside the bar, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze never leaving Victoria for even a second. He had chosen this spot on purpose. Behind him, a large decorative mirror reflected the entire scene on the far side of the room, where Victoria stood with Eleanor. From this angle, he could watch without anyone noticing, and then the incident happened. Eleanor reached for the glass of water on the table, but her trembling hands couldn't hold it steady. The glass slipped free, water spilling across the pristine white tablecloth, some of it splashing onto Victoria's red dress. The whole room seemed to pause for a heartbeat. Every eye turned toward them. Victoria laughed, the gentle, forgiving smile of a saint. "It's all right, Mother. It's only a little water." She bent down, took a napkin, and wiped Eleanor's hand with such tender care that a few women nearby clicked their tongues in admiration. "What a wonderful daughter-in-law," one woman whispered to her friend. "The Blackwoods are so lucky to have her." Nathan watched it all through the mirror. He watched Victoria wipe his mother's hand, watched the angelic smile on her lips, and then he saw the moment no one else saw. When the guests turned away, when attention shifted elsewhere, Victoria's face changed completely. The smile vanished, replaced by a cold look of disgust, and the hand that had just been wiping water so gently now pinched hard into Eleanor's thin arm, pinched until the skin puckered beneath fingers tipped with red nail polish. "Useless old woman," Victoria hissed through her teeth, her voice cold as ice. Eleanor let out a small, broken sound, her eyes widening in fear. She wanted to cry for help, but she couldn't. The illness had stolen her ability to express herself long ago. All she could do was sit there shaking, tears gathering at the edge of her clouded eyes. Sophia stood only a few steps away. She had seen everything. Without hesitation, the young nurse started forward to intervene. But Victoria was faster. She lifted her head, caught Sophia's gaze, and smiled a smile as sharp as winter. "Mind your own business," Victoria said, her voice low enough that only the two of them could hear, yet keen enough to cut like a knife. Sophia stopped, her hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to say something, wanted to shout and tell the entire world who this devil dressed as an angel really was. But she couldn't. Not because she was afraid for herself, but because she knew she would lose her job, and losing her job meant losing her chance to save her younger brother's life. So she stood there, swallowing her tears, watching Victoria turn back with that radiant smile and continue playing the perfect fiancé. Across the room, Nathan remained before the mirror. He had seen everything, every detail, every expression, every movement. He had seen the way Victoria pinched his mother, seen the pain and terror in Eleanor's eyes, seen Sophia's helplessness. His hand tightened around his glass until his knuckles turned white. The crystal trembled, nearly shattering in his grip. But Nathan didn't let it break. He set the glass down on the bar, his face blank. Yet inside him a storm was roaring. He had his answer to every question that had haunted him for the past week. Victoria Ashford was not who she pretended to be. And now Nathan knew exactly what kind of enemy he was facing. 3 days after the party, Sophia asked for permission to take half a day off to bring her younger brother back to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. Nathan agreed at once. He knew the young nurse had been working without pause for months, and she deserved rest. Besides, Victoria promised she'd look after Eleanor while Sophia was away. And even though Nathan no longer trusted his fiancée, he thought that in broad daylight, with plenty of servants in the house, Victoria wouldn't dare do anything outrageous. He was wrong. Sophia returned to the Blackwood mansion at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, earlier than expected because Ethan's follow-up appointment ended quickly. She stepped through the gate, her chest lighter with relief, because the doctor had said her brother's condition was stable, that all they had to do was keep monitoring him and prepare for the upcoming surgery. But all that relief evaporated the instant she pushed open the front door and walked in. A servant's screams rang out from the direction of the grand foyer. Sophia ran toward the sound, her heart hammering in her ribcage like it might burst. And then she saw it. Eleanor lay motionless at the foot of the staircase, her fragile body like a bird with a broken wing. Her left arm was bent at a grotesque angle, clearly fractured. Blood seeped from a wound on her forehead, staining her snow-white hair red. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her face pale as paper. "Mrs. Eleanor," Sophia screamed, throwing herself to the elderly woman's side, her knees cracking onto the icy stone floor. Shaking, she checked for a pulse, checked for breath, while tears poured down her face without stopping. Eleanor was still alive, but she was in terrible shape. "Someone call an ambulance," Sophia shouted at the servants standing around, all of them white-faced and frozen with fear. Victoria stood at the top of the stairs, her back against the railing, her face as white as chalk. She looked down with eyes wide, panic carved into every line of her features. When her gaze met Sophia's, Victoria spoke at once, her voice trembling. She fell. "I was in my room when I heard a noise. I ran out, and she was already down there. I couldn't catch her. I swear I couldn't." Sophia didn't answer. She didn't have time for excuses. She focused all her attention on Eleanor, doing what first aid she could while waiting for the ambulance to arrive. But inside her, a fire of anger was burning. She didn't believe Victoria. Not for a second. Nathan got home 20 minutes after he received the call. He stormed into the sitting room, where Eleanor was being examined by Dr. William Chen, the family's private physician. Dr. Chen was a middle-aged man with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, and he'd cared for the Blackwood family's health for more than 20 years. He looked at Nathan with a grave expression, then motioned for him to follow into the hallway. "How is she?" Nathan asked, his voice tight. Dr. Chen glanced around to make sure no one could hear, then spoke in a low, serious tone. "A broken arm, a mild head injury, a few bruises. She'll recover. But Nathan, there's something I need to tell you. These injuries, they don't look like a typical fall." Nathan stayed silent, waiting. When an elderly person falls downstairs, they usually have some reflex to brace with their hands, or twist to protect themselves. But Mrs. Eleanor's injuries suggest she went straight down, as if she was pushed from behind and didn't have time to react. Dr. Chen paused, his gaze steady on Nathan's. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but as a doctor, and also as someone who's known your family a long time, I think you should check the security cameras." Nathan nodded, thanked the doctor, and went straight to the security room. But what he discovered made the blood in his veins feel like it turned to ice. The staircase security camera had malfunctioned at exactly the time of the incident. The screen showed only distorted static lines, not a single usable image. The guard explained that this was the first time the system had ever had a problem like this, and they didn't understand why. But Nathan understood. He understood better than anyone. Nathan stood alone in the security room, staring at the black and white interference on the monitor, and the memory of the first time he met Victoria came rushing back like a flood. It had been at a high society party more than a year ago. Victoria had entered the room like a spring breeze, fresh and alluring enough that every gaze turned toward her. She had approached Nathan, offered a gentle smile, and said she admired the Blackwood family's charitable contributions. She had been so perfect it felt impossible. And now Nathan wondered whether that perfection was real, or whether it had been a performance carefully staged from the very beginning. Had Victoria deliberately come after him because she knew who he was, knew just how wealthy his family was, Had everything he thought was love been nothing more than a trap already set? That night, Nathan sat beside his mother's bed, holding her thin hand. Eleanor still wasn't fully awake, drifting in a drugged, pain-dulled sleep. Sophia had gone back to her room to rest after an exhausting day, but she'd left a vase of fresh flowers on the bedside table, a small gesture, yet heavy with meaning. Nathan looked at his mother, the woman who had given birth to him, raised him, loved him without conditions. And someone had hurt her. Someone was living under the same roof as him. Then Eleanor opened her eyes. It was only a brief moment, but her eyes were strangely clear, lucid as if Alzheimer's had never existed. She tightened her grip on Nathan's hand, her lips moving. "My son." Her voice was rough and faint. Nathan bent closer to hear. And then Eleanor said only 3 words, but those 3 words hit him like bullets straight through the heart. "She pushed your mother." Then the light in her eyes went out, and she sank back into the haze, leaving Nathan sitting there in the dark with a shattered heart and a rage roaring in his chest. He stood, walked out of the room, pulled out his phone, and called Marcus Reed, his most trusted bodyguard. His voice was ice as he spoke into the phone. "Find out everything about Victoria. Everything. Don't miss a single detail." It was late, and the Blackwood mansion lay sunk in darkness and a heavy silence. Eleanor had been taken to the hospital for overnight observation. Dr. Chen wanted to make sure there were no complications from the head injury. Victoria had retreated to her own room early, saying she was too shocked and needed rest. Nathan sat alone in his study, the glass of whiskey on the desk untouched, his eyes fixed on nothing at all. A soft knock made him look up. The door opened a crack, and Sophia stepped in. She was still in her nurse's uniform, her hair fallen loose, not even tied back in time, her face hollow with worry and lack of sleep. But in her eyes there was a kind of determination Nathan had never seen in her before. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to talk to you," Sophia said, her voice trembling slightly, but not from fear. "There are things I should have told you a long time ago." Nathan gestured for her to sit in the chair across from him, but Sophia shook her head. She stayed where she was, hands clenched together as if she were trying to draw courage from her own bones. Then she began to speak, and what she said made Nathan feel as if someone were squeezing his heart shut. "What happened today wasn't the first time," Sophia said, her voice even, as if she were forcing her feelings down. "For the past 6 months, since Miss Victoria came here, I've seen things I will never be able to forget." She pulled up her sleeve, took out her phone, and showed Nathan photographs. "This is Mrs. Eleanor's arm from last week," she said as she scrolled through the images. "Do you see these bruises? They're shaped like fingers. Not from her bumping into things, not from an accident. These are marks from being grabbed, being yanked, being abused." Nathan stared at the photos, each one like a blade cutting into him. A bruise on the arm, a scrape on the wrist, redness on the shoulder, all of it hidden beneath the long sleeves Eleanor always wore. "And there's more," Sophia went on, her voice starting to shake harder now. "Every time you go out of town and I'm not on shift, Miss Victoria won't let Mrs. Eleanor eat. She starves her. Sometimes the whole day she's given nothing but water. When I come back, she's so hungry she shakes. But Miss Victoria says she refuses to eat, that it's a symptom of Alzheimer's. I know it's a lie, but I didn't have proof." Nathan's hand tightened around the chair arm until his knuckles turned white. "Why?" he asked, his voice rough. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Sophia was silent for a moment. Then she looked up at Nathan, and he saw tears gathering in her brown eyes. "Because she threatened me," Sophia said, her voice breaking. "She knows my weakness, and she used it to silence me. She said if I dared say a word, she'd ruin my life. She'd make sure I could never find work anywhere in this city again." "What weakness?" Nathan asked. Sophia drew a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice splintered. "I have a younger brother named Ethan. He's 22, and he has a congenital heart condition. He needs a surgery that costs $200,000, or he'll die." She stopped, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I sold everything I had. The small apartment my parents left me, my old car, everything valuable. I work 16 hours a day. I take extra night shifts at another hospital, but it's still not enough. This job, the salary here, is my only hope of saving my brother. If I lose it, Ethan will die." The room fell into silence. Nathan looked at the young woman standing in front of him, at her thin shoulders trembling, at the tears that wouldn't stop. He understood now. He understood why she'd been silent, why she'd endured, why she'd swallowed her tears each time she watched Victoria torment Eleanor. Not because she was a coward, but because she loved her brother enough to sacrifice everything. But I was wrong. Sophia broke into sobs, no longer able to hold it in. I stayed silent to save my brother, while Mrs. Eleanor had to suffer alone. I'm a nurse. My job is to protect my patients. And I failed. I let an innocent woman be abused right in front of me because I was afraid of losing my job. I don't deserve forgiveness. She crumpled, her hands covering her face, her stifled crying filling the still room. It wasn't the crying of fear or weakness. It was the crying of guilt, of torment piled up over 6 long months, of a good heart trapped in a situation it could never truly win. Nathan stood, walked to Sophia, and laid a hand on her shoulder, feeling the trembling beneath the thin fabric of her uniform. She lifted her head to look at him, eyes red and wet. "You're not the one at fault," Nathan said, his voice low and firm. "You did what you could in circumstances no one should have to endure. You protected my mother when you could. You stepped in to stop Victoria when you had the chance. That isn't cowardice. That's desperate courage." He paused, his gaze darkening like a sky before a storm. "The person at fault here isn't you, and that person will pay." The next morning, Nathan sat in his study waiting for Marcus to come with a report. He hadn't slept all night. Sophia's words kept echoing in his head without mercy. But before he acted, he needed to know everything, not only about Victoria, but also about the young nurse who had dared to stand up and protect his mother. Marcus walked in with a thick file in his hands. The 40-year-old man, broad-shouldered and cold-faced, had been at Nathan's side for 15 years. He was the only person Nathan trusted without question in an underworld built on betrayal. "I looked into Sophia Hartley, like you asked," Marcus said, setting the file on the desk, "and I think you need to hear this." Nathan nodded, signaling for him to continue. Marcus opened the file. His voice was steady, the tone of someone reading a formal report. But what he delivered was the story of a life shaped by tragedy. Sophia Hartley, 27 years old, born into an ordinary middle-class family in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Father was a mechanic. Mother was an elementary school teacher. Family life was peaceful until she was 15. One winter evening, her parents were on their way home after a parent-teacher meeting when they were in an accident. A truck lost control and slammed straight into their car. Both of them died at the scene. Nathan closed his eyes, picturing a 15-year-old girl being told her parents were gone. He couldn't imagine pain that large. After the funeral, no relatives were willing to take in the 2 children. Marcus continued. Sophia and her brother Ethan, who was only 10 at the time, were sent to an orphanage. But Sophia refused to let her brother be separated from her. She asked for permission to work part-time so she could afford to rent a small room, and she took legal responsibility for her brother when she was only 15. 15, Nathan thought. At that age, he had still been sheltered in luxury, while Sophia had already been carrying the weight of an adult. She studied and worked at the same time, Marcus went on. School during the day, waiting tables at night, extra shifts at a supermarket on weekends. She graduated high school with top marks, then went on to nursing school. Through 4 years of college, she didn't have a single day of rest, not a single proper meal. Every dollar she earned went to tuition and keeping her brother fed. Marcus turned to the next page, and his voice dipped slightly. But that wasn't all. When she was 23, she had a relationship with a man named Derek. He seemed kind at first, but later showed his violent nature. He beat her for nearly a year before she found the courage to run. Nathan's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. He remembered the first time he met Sophia, how she always wore high-necked, long-sleeved clothes, even in the heat. He had assumed it was simply modesty. She still has scars on her back, Marcus said, his voice quieter. Scars from a leather belt he used on her. But she never told anyone. Never complained. She just kept working and kept living. Nathan sat in silence, his heart feeling as if someone were crushing it. That young woman had lived through hell, not once, but over and over, and still she stood upright. She could still smile softly at Eleanor, still care for someone else with warmth and patience that seemed endless. As for the apartment and the money, Marcus finished. After Ethan was diagnosed with heart disease last year, she sold the small apartment her parents had left behind, the only piece of family she still had. She works 16 to 18 hours a day, takes every shift she can, saves every dollar. But what she's managed to gather is still far short of the surgery cost. Nathan looked at the file in front of him, at the photos and documents that mapped out Sophia Hartley's life. Then he thought of Victoria Ashford, a woman born into silk, spoiled from childhood, who had never once had to worry about money or the future. Victoria had everything anyone could ever want, and yet she was still greedy, still cruel, still willing to torment a sick old woman to get what she wanted. Sophia, on the other hand, had nothing, no family, no property, no guaranteed future. And still she was willing to sacrifice, still gentle and compassionate, still willing to protect someone else while she herself was drowning. Nathan closed the file, his eyes drifting to the window where morning sunlight was spilling into the room. He thought to himself that some people are born into luxury and carry hearts cold as stone, and some people grow up in suffering, yet still shine with kindness. Nathan sat in his study, the audio recording of Victoria's voice and her lover's voice still echoing inside his head. That old woman will disappear soon. And Nathan, he trusts you completely. Those words felt like needles driven into his heart, not from pain, but from contempt. Victoria thought she could deceive him, thought he was nothing more than a wealthy businessman, naive and easy to manipulate. She didn't know who he really was, and that would be the greatest mistake of her life. Marcus stood across from him, waiting for orders. In the underworld, when someone dared to lay a hand on Nathan Blackwood's family, the price was usually paid in blood and tears. But this time, Nathan didn't want to do it that way. Victoria Ashford worshipped image and social status above everything else in the world. She'd spent her entire life building a flawless facade, so the upper class would admire her and envy her. So the best punishment wasn't killing her. It was destroying everything she treasured, right in front of the very people she most wanted to impress. "We'll throw a party," Nathan said, his voice as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "An engagement party. The most spectacular Los Angeles has ever seen." Marcus lifted an eyebrow in surprise but didn't ask questions. He'd followed Nathan long enough to know his boss always had a reason for every decision. "Invite everyone," Nathan continued. "Politicians, business leaders, stars, the media. Invite the people Victoria most wants to connect with, the people she's been trying to impress for so long. I want her standing at the highest peak before she falls into the abyss." Marcus nodded, beginning to understand the plan. "What about the evidence?" Marcus asked. "Have everything ready," Nathan replied. "The recording, the video from the security cameras we managed to restore, the messages between her and that lawyer. I want it all displayed so clearly no one can doubt it. But we need one more person from the inside," Marcus said. "Someone who can confirm what Victoria's done. Someone the upper class will believe." Nathan had already thought of that, and he knew exactly who it was. "Caroline Bennett," he said. "Victoria's closest friend." Marcus looked startled. "She's Victoria's best friend. Why would she betray her?" "Because she has a reason," Nathan answered with a cold smile. "Find out what happened between Caroline and a man named Thomas Reed 2 years ago." 2 days later, Nathan met Caroline Bennett at an upscale cafe in Beverly Hills. The 31-year-old woman with golden blonde hair and icy blue eyes studied him with caution. "I don't understand why you wanted to meet me," Caroline said. "I'm Victoria's friend." "That's right," Nathan nodded. "And you also loved Thomas Reed before Victoria took him from you." Caroline's face shifted, her lips pressing tight. "Who told you that?" "It doesn't matter who told me," Nathan said. "What matters is that you know exactly what Victoria Ashford is like. You know what she did to Thomas, how she seduced him behind your back, how she laughed in your face when you found out the truth." Caroline fell silent for a long time, painful memories written plainly across her features. Finally, she lifted her gaze to Nathan. "What do you want?" "I want justice," Nathan said. "And I think you do too." After that meeting, Caroline agreed to cooperate. She would be the one to stand up and confirm Victoria's sins in front of all the guests, a credible voice coming from the traitor's own closest friend. The final step in the plan was Eleanor. Nathan found Sophia in the garden that afternoon, where she was pushing the old woman's wheelchair beneath the trees, letting her breathe the air and feel the light. "I want you to bring my mother to the engagement party," Nathan said. Sophia looked at him, surprised. Mrs. Eleanor had never been invited to events like that. Victoria had always found ways to keep her in her room, away from the public eye. "She'll worry," Sophia said. "She'll think something isn't right." "That's exactly what I want," Nathan replied, his gaze cold as steel. "I want her uneasy. I want her off balance. And I want my mother there to witness the moment her mask falls." Sophia nodded, understanding Nathan's plan. She looked at Eleanor sitting peacefully in the wheelchair, her clouded eyes resting on the flowers in the garden. Justice would be carried out, and the old woman would be the witness. The following week, Invitations went out across Los Angeles. The engagement party of Nathan Blackwood and Victoria Ashford would be the event of the year, and no one wanted to miss it. Victoria was beside herself with joy. She believed this was the final stepping stone before she became the mistress of the Blackwood Empire. She didn't know the stage had already been built, the actors had already taken their places, and all that remained was to wait for the curtain to rise. The Blackwood mansion had never looked so radiant. Enormous crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, spilling warm golden light like honey, their glow shimmering across marble floors polished until they could hold a reflection. Fresh flowers were everywhere. Thousands of white and blush roses formed long, winding garlands around the columns, pouring their lush fragrance through the room. A live orchestra of 20 musicians played classical symphonies in one corner, violin and piano weaving together into an atmosphere both elegant and grand. The banquet tables were set with the most expensive porcelain and silver, and Dom Perignon champagne bottled in '89 was poured into delicate crystal flutes. This wasn't only an engagement party, it was a declaration of the Blackwood family's power and wealth, and Victoria Ashford, in a custom-made white haute couture gown designed by a Paris fashion house, was the queen of the night. She stood at the entrance, greeting guests, a brilliant smile that never faded from her lips, her eyes sparkling whenever they found a camera lens. The white dress hugged her figure, its long train trailing over the floor like a ribbon of milk. At her neck and ears glittered the diamond set Nathan had given her for today. She looked like a princess, stepped out of a fairy tale, and she knew it. Tonight was the most glorious night of her life, the final step before she officially became the mistress of the Blackwood Empire. Guests arrived one after another, each a celebrated name in Los Angeles high society. Senator Patterson with his wife, technology billionaire Richard Yamamoto, Oscar-winning actress Margaret Collins, the chairman of the largest media conglomerate on the West Coast. They were the people Victoria had spent her entire life trying to impress, the people who could open doors to the highest circles of the elite, and tonight, all of them were here for her. Victoria received each one with flawless charm. She said exactly what needed to be said, laughed at exactly the right moments, made everyone feel seen and valued. She was at the peak of her life, and nothing could pull her down, or so she thought. When Eleanor was rolled in her wheelchair, Victoria's brow tightened for a moment. The elderly woman wore an elegant pale blue dress, her silver hair neatly brushed, and Sophia stood behind the chair, pushing it with a calm expression. This was something Victoria hadn't expected. Nathan had never asked for his mother to appear at events like this, and Eleanor's presence made Victoria uneasy. But she couldn't object, not with hundreds of guests watching. She smiled and moved to Eleanor, bending to take her hand with false tenderness. "You're here, Mother, I'm so happy." She said it loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Tonight wouldn't be complete without you." Eleanor didn't respond, her clouded eyes fixed somewhere in the distance. But when Victoria tightened her grip, Sophia saw Eleanor flinch slightly, a reflex born from fear that had sunk deep into the mind. The party went on, smooth and polished. Guests ate and drank, talked and danced beneath the shimmering lights. Nathan moved through the crowd with his usual composure, offering polite smiles, shaking hands with business partners, playing the perfect host. Victoria stayed close at his side like a shadow, showing off her engagement ring to anyone who asked, talking about the lavish wedding planned for next spring. Nothing seemed out of place, no sign that tonight would be any different from the parties before. If someone had been expecting drama, they might have thought they were mistaken. Nathan Blackwood appeared to have forgiven Victoria, or perhaps he knew nothing of her sins. Everything looked so normal it was dull. Then the clock struck, 9 o'clock in the evening. The orchestra stopped. The lights in the room softened, and a spotlight spilled onto the small stage at the far end of the grand hall. Nathan stepped up, microphone in hand, a smile on his lips. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice carrying across the room. "Your presence is a great honor to me. Tonight is a special night, and I have an important announcement I'd like to share with all of you." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile brightened, her heart pounding with thrill and delight. This is it, she thought. This is the moment she had been waiting for all this time. Nathan gestured for her to come up onto the stage. Victoria went up with practiced grace, her magnificent white gown gliding across the floor, her smile never dimming. She stood beside Nathan, her hand clasping his, lifting her face to him with eyes full of carefully staged love. It was the brightest smile of her life, the most triumphant moment in a lifetime of calculation. The entire hall fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the stage. No one knew the storm was about to break. Nathan lifted the microphone, the spotlight shining straight onto him and Victoria standing at his side. "Tonight, I want to introduce to all of you the woman who truly matters in my life," he said, his voice carrying through the room. Victoria tightened her grip on his hand, the smile on her lips so dazzling it nearly hurt to look at. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for all this time. Nathan would present her before hundreds of the most powerful people in Los Angeles. She would officially become the woman of the Blackwood boss. She was ready for the applause, ready to dip her head modestly and offer the words of thanks she'd rehearsed in advance. Nathan looked down at Victoria's hand wrapped tightly around his, and for a brief moment, he hesitated. There had been a time when he had truly loved this woman. He had loved her gentle smile, loved the way she listened when he spoke, loved the way she made him feel less alone. But that woman didn't exist. That woman had only been a character Victoria created to deceive him, and Nathan Blackwood didn't forgive betrayal. "Not you, Victoria," Nathan said, his voice cold as ice, as he released her hand and stepped to the side. A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall like a wave. Victoria froze, the smile on her lips hardening into something brittle. She stared at Nathan, eyes wide, not understanding what was happening. "Darling, what are you saying?" she asked, her voice shaking. "This is our engagement party." Nathan didn't answer. He signaled to Marcus, and at once the sound system began to play a recording. "That old woman will disappear soon." Victoria's voice filled the room, clear and razor-sharp. "And Nathan, he trusts you completely. When it's done, we'll have everything." Victoria's face went white as paper. She looked around in panic, taking in the shocked, disgusted faces of the guests, taking in Nathan standing there with eyes cold and empty of feeling. "That's not me," she stammered. "Someone imitated my voice. Darling, I swear I never said those things." But Nathan wasn't finished. He nodded again, and the large screen behind the stage lit up. Restored security footage began to play, showing Victoria pushing Eleanor down the stairs. Then came photographs of messages between Victoria and her lawyer lover, discussing a plan to seize the Blackwood family's assets. The whispers in the hall grew louder. "I can't believe it," a woman gasped. "She did that to a sick old woman?" Then Caroline Bennett rose from the guests' table and stepped forward, her face cold and determined. "I can confirm everything you've just seen," Caroline said, her voice carrying into the tense silence. "Victoria Ashford isn't who she pretends to be. She deceived all of us, even me, the person who once considered her my closest friend. She's a con artist, an abuser, and a woman without a heart." Victoria whipped around to Caroline, her eyes burning with rage and betrayal. "Caroline, you dare betray me? After everything I've done for you? Everything you've done for me?" Caroline gave a thin, bitter laugh. "You stole my boyfriend. You destroyed my relationship. And you laughed in my face when I cried. You don't get to talk about betrayal, Victoria." By then, Victoria had lost control completely. The perfect mask she'd built over years began to crack, and the devil inside her started to show. She turned on Nathan, her face twisted with fury, her eyes bloodshot like an animal driven into a corner. "You think you're so clever, Nathan Blackwood?" she screamed, her shrill voice slicing through the hall. "You think you can humiliate me in front of all these people? That old woman should have died a long time ago. She's nothing but dead weight, an obstacle between me and your fortune. And you're just a fool I used. I never loved you, not for 1 second." The entire hall went still. No one spoke. No one dared breathe too loudly. Hundreds of eyes fixed on Victoria with horror and disgust, as if they were watching a monster shed its skin right in front of them. This was no longer the beautiful, graceful Victoria Ashford. This was her true face, ugly, greedy, and cruel to the bone. Nathan stood there, his expression unreadable, but inside him was a cold satisfaction. The perfect mask had finally fallen, and Victoria had destroyed herself with her own hands before the very world she worshipped. Victoria stood in the middle of the stage, breathing hard, her eyes darting wildly like an animal driven into a corner. She looked around. She saw the guests' faces, twisted with disgust and contempt. She saw Nathan standing there, cold and still as stone. She saw Caroline wearing that victorious smile. No, this couldn't be happening. She'd planned everything perfectly, performed perfectly, done everything perfectly. Someone had to be responsible for this collapse. Someone had to pay. And then her gaze locked on Sophia, the young nurse standing beside Eleanor's wheelchair in the corner of the room. Sophia, who was always at Eleanor's side. Sophia, who had witnessed everything. Sophia, who had dared to step between her and the old woman. It was her. It was all her. That's her. Victoria screamed, her voice shrill, tearing through the air like ripped fabric. It's all her fault. She ruined everything I had. No one had time to react when Victoria lunged off the stage, her long white gown sweeping the floor, her heels clacking against the marble. She charged straight at Sophia with her hands raised, red polished nails like sharp claws ready to rip and scratch. I'll kill you, Victoria shrieked. You took everything from me. But before she could reach Sophia, a powerful hand seized her arm and yanked her backward. Marcus Reed, Nathan's most trusted bodyguard, had appeared at exactly the right moment. With one hand, he held Victoria as if she were nothing more than a rag doll, his face cold and expressionless. Let me go. Victoria thrashed like a madwoman. Don't you know who I am? I'm Victoria Ashford. I'll destroy all of you. But her threats were only empty noise now. No one feared her anymore. No one looked at her with admiration or envy. In the eyes of the people who once wanted to be close to her, there was only contempt and revulsion. In the chaos, no one noticed Eleanor. The old woman sat in the wheelchair, eyes wide with terror, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. Victoria's screaming, the crowds murmuring, the flash of cameras from reporters who had slipped in, all of it crashed against Eleanor's fragile mind like wave after wave. She began to gasp, one hand clutching her chest, her face turning pale as paper. Alzheimer's wasn't the only thing tormenting her. Her aging heart was buckling under the strain of too much shock, too much noise, too much fear. Mrs. Eleanor. Sophia was the first to see it. She didn't care that Victoria was being restrained only a few steps away. She didn't care about the hundreds of eyes locked on the scandal. She didn't care about anything except the frail woman in front of her. She dropped to her knees beside the wheelchair and took Eleanor's trembling hands in her own. Look at me, Sophia said, her voice calm and gentle as a lullaby in the middle of a storm. Breathe slowly. Follow me. In. Out. That's it. Good. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. As she spoke, she rubbed Eleanor's back with slow, steady motions, her eyes never leaving the old woman's face for even a second. She was completely focused on keeping Eleanor safe, as if the outside world no longer existed. Nathan stood not far away, and he saw everything. He saw the elite guests whispering about the scandal, taking photos and recording videos to post on social media. He saw Victoria thrashing and hurling curses in Marcus's grip. He saw Caroline savoring her enemy's downfall with cold satisfaction. But more than anything, he saw Sophia, the young nurse with brown hair fallen loose, her face drained with worry, kneeling on the freezing marble beside his mother. She didn't care about the scandal. She didn't care about the stairs. She didn't care about anything except Eleanor. It was the final contrast, the clearest contrast between two women. Victoria, who had everything, yet was so greedy she would torment a sick old woman. And Sophia, who had nothing, yet was willing to sacrifice everything to protect someone else. Take her away. Nathan ordered Marcus, his voice cold and without emotion. I don't want to see her face again. Marcus nodded and began dragging Victoria out of the room. She kept struggling, kept screaming threats and curses, but no one listened anymore. The guests turned their backs on her. The people who once wanted her friendship now looked at her the way they would look at an insect. You'll regret this, Victoria screamed as she was hauled through the doorway. I'll come back. I'll destroy all of you. But the words only echoed into emptiness. The door slammed shut behind her. In the world of high society, she'd spent her whole life forcing her way into closed forever. No more parties would invite her. No more doors would open for her. Victoria Ashford, once a shining star, was now nothing but a cursed name among the elite. Nathan walked to his mother, then knelt beside Sophia. Eleanor was calmer now, her breathing steadier again, but fear still clung to her eyes. When she saw Nathan, she reached out for his hand, and he felt the trembling in her thin fingers. My son, she whispered. Nathan held his mother's hand tightly, his throat tightening. Beside him, Sophia continued to rub Eleanor's back gently, her warm brown eyes resting on the old woman with endless tenderness. In the middle of the hell of scandal and betrayal, Nathan saw the only angel there was, and she was kneeling beside his mother. A few weeks had passed since the night of that fateful party. The Blackwood mansion was quieter now than it had ever been. Victoria's shadow no longer haunted the corners of the corridors, and the threatening whispers that once echoed through the late hours were gone. Sophia returned to caring for Eleanor the way she had before, but everything was different. She didn't have to be afraid anymore. She didn't have to swallow her tears in silence while watching the old woman suffer. Now she could pour all her strength into giving Eleanor the most peaceful days possible. One late autumn afternoon, as warm golden sunlight streamed through lace curtains, Sophia decided to clean out the old cabinet in the corner of Eleanor's room. The antique oak piece hadn't been opened in a long time. Dust lay thick on the drawers like a blanket made of time. Sophia wiped each compartment gently, careful with the aged treasures inside. Faded photographs, handwritten letters with ink that had blurred, keepsakes that belonged to an entire lifetime. Then her fingers brushed something tucked deep into the far corner of the last drawer. She pulled out a small wooden box, its surface carved with delicate patterns, now coated in the dust of years. It fit neatly in her palm, light as a forgotten dream. Sophia blew away the dust and discovered carvings of roses and musical notes circling the box. It was an old music box. "Is this yours, Mrs. Eleanor?" Sophia asked, turning to the elderly woman sitting on the bed, her clouded gaze fixed toward the window. Eleanor didn't respond, as she hadn't on most days in recent months. Alzheimer's had stolen most of her memory and awareness, leaving a soul stranded in a world of her own. Sophia lifted the lid gently. A classic waltz began to play, clear and tender as crystal bells. The notes shimmered into the air, carrying the taste of a distant era, of dazzling ballrooms and dances beneath chandeliers. Inside the box, a tiny porcelain dancer began to spin with the music, her pure white skirt flaring like butterfly wings. Sophia started to close it, but then she heard a sound that made her freeze. Crying. Eleanor was crying. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks. But it wasn't the crying of pain or fear Sophia had seen before. It was the crying of someone remembering something, of a soul finding its way back to the past after months lost in fog. And then Eleanor spoke, her voice trembling, yet astonishingly clear, the clearest it had been in months. "My father gave me that box when I was 7. Sophia nearly dropped it in shock. She stared at Eleanor, at eyes that were no longer dull and distant, but bright, as if lit from within. She was here, truly here, not the ghost of illness, but Eleanor Blackwood as she once had been. "I was a ballet dancer," Eleanor went on, her voice carrying the smile of memory. "Father said I danced like an angel, so he searched everywhere to buy me this music box. I held it close and slept with it every night all summer long." Sophia sat on the edge of the bed and took Eleanor's hand, tears rising in her own eyes. "You remember? You remember everything?" Eleanor nodded slowly, her gaze resting on the music box as it turned, tenderness without end in her expression. She began to talk about her childhood, about ballet practice in a room filled with sunlight, about how her parents had sacrificed so she could pursue her passion, about the first night she performed on stage when she was 12. Her voice was slow, breaking in places, but every word carried the weight of a whole life. Outside the door, Nathan stood perfectly still. He'd come to see his mother as he did every day, but when he heard her voice, he stopped. He leaned his back against the wall and listened to her speak. This was something he had thought he'd lost forever. For the past 2 years, since Alzheimer's had begun taking his mother piece by piece, he hadn't heard her speak this clearly. He'd grown used to her not recognizing him, used to the empty stare and the sentences that wandered without meaning. He'd told himself his mother was gone, even though her body was still here. But now, hearing her warm voice telling stories from long ago, Nathan felt as if a part of his soul was being healed. He pushed the door open and stepped in, and Eleanor looked up at him, her eyes lit when she recognized her son. "Nathan," she said his name, her voice shaking with emotion. "My son." Nathan moved to the bed and dropped to his knees beside Sophia, taking his mother's other hand. He couldn't speak. His throat tightened with everything rising at once. The music box kept turning. The waltz continued, soft and steady. The porcelain dancer kept spinning her endless dance, and the three of them sat there in the afternoon light, time seeming to pause, the outside world fading away, leaving only that small room, the ancient melody, and 3 hearts touching each other. Eleanor held Nathan's and Sophia's hands, pulling them a little closer. She looked at them through tears that still shone with happiness, and she spoke, her voice light as breath, yet carrying an entire sky of love. "This is home. This is truly my home." Sophia and Nathan looked at each other over the old woman's bed, their eyes filled with tears of joy and gratitude. They understood the moment was priceless, that tomorrow the illness might steal Eleanor again, that the fog might settle back over her mind. But today, in this golden autumn afternoon, they had her here, truly here. And that was all they needed, because even in the midst of forgetting, There are memories that survive in the heart, and nothing can erase them. Several months had passed since the night Nathan confessed his love to Sophia beneath the moonlight in the garden. Spring had arrived, bringing warm breezes and blossoms everywhere across the grounds of the Blackwood estate. Deep red roses, bright yellow tulips, and rich purple lavender filled the morning air with their sweet perfume. Birds sang in the branches, and gentle sunlight filtered through lush green leaves, scattering glimmering patches of light across the cobblestone path leading into the garden. It was the most peaceful morning this mansion had ever known. Nathan pushed Eleanor's wheelchair along the flower-lined walkway, while Sophia walked beside them, her hand resting lightly on the old woman's shoulder. Eleanor was much weaker than she had been in the months before. Her health was slowly fading under time's unforgiving law. Yet her face held absolute peace, and her eyes, though clouded, still carried a quiet happiness whenever she saw Nathan and Sophia nearby. In her lap, she cradled the antique music box like a treasure beyond price, her thin fingers stroking the rosewood surface, polished until it shone. When they stopped beneath the great old oak, an oak that had stood for centuries, watching generations of the Blackwood family pass beneath its branches, Eleanor gently lifted the lid of the music box. The familiar waltz rose again, clear and tender as the whisper of the past. The porcelain dancer inside began to spin, her white skirt floating with every note. Eleanor started to sing along softly, her voice trembling and frail, yet each note carried the weight of an entire lifetime of memory. She sang of the days when she was a 7-year-old girl, and her father placed the music box in her hands, of ballet performances beneath brilliant stage lights, of love and loss, of happiness and sorrow that had moved through her life. Nathan and Sophia stood beside her, listening with hearts tight and full. They knew their time with her was running short, that every moment like this was priceless, never to come again. When the song ended, Eleanor looked up at them both. Her eyes brightened with a rare clarity, as if, for this moment, the illness had loosened its grip. She reached out and took Nathan's hand on one side and Sophia's on the other, drawing them closer. "Promise your mother," she said, slow and deliberate, each word clear. "Promise me you'll take care of each other." Nathan dropped to his knees beside the wheelchair, gripping his mother's hand tightly. Sophia knelt on the other side, tears already sliding down her cheeks. "We promise," they said together, voices trembling but firm. "We'll always be together, Mom." Eleanor smiled, the most peaceful smile she had ever worn. She looked at Nathan, the son she had carried and raised, the boy who had become a grown man who could love and protect the people around him. Then she looked at Sophia, the young woman she loved like her own daughter, the one who had cared for her with a whole heart through the darkest days. "Good," Eleanor whispered. "I can rest now." Then Eleanor closed her eyes, her smile still lingering on her lips. Her breathing was steady and gentle, her face serene as a child slipping into sweet sleep. Maybe she was only resting. Maybe she was simply taking a quiet breath after a long, tired life. No one knew for certain, and no one wanted to break the peace of that moment. Nathan and Sophia looked at each other over the wheelchair, tears bright in their eyes. Yet there was no sorrow there, only peace, gratitude, and a love without end. They had weathered storms together. They had survived trials that once felt impossible, and now they stood here, together, beneath the old oak, with the woman they loved most resting in a calm, untroubled sleep. Afternoon sunlight fell through the leaves, laying golden streaks over the three of them like a blessing from heaven. The music box kept turning. The waltz continued, soft and tender. The porcelain dancer kept spinning her endless dance. And there, beneath the century-old oak, in a garden filled with flowers and sun, Nathan reached for Sophia's hand and held it tight, a promise that didn't need words. They would stay together. They would take care of each other. They would keep their promise to Eleanor until their final breath. Because true greatness isn't measured by power or money. It's measured by the ability to love, to forgive, and to stay when everyone else has turned away. In a world full of darkness, love is the only light worth protecting. The story of Nathan, Sophia, and Eleanor had come to a close, but the lessons it left behind would keep echoing. That sometimes the people who seem the most perfect carry the darkest hearts. That the most ordinary, the poorest, can hold the noblest souls. That true love doesn't need wealth or status. It only needs two sincere hearts willing to sacrifice for each other. And that family isn't only those who share blood, but also those who choose to stand beside us in our hardest moments. If this story has touched your heart, please press the like button and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more moving stories every day. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this story. Which character impressed you the most? Have you ever met people like Victoria in real life? Or have you been fortunate enough to meet someone like Sophia, willing to sacrifice everything to protect others? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We truly value every contribution that comes from the depths of your heart. Finally, we wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and a heart full of love every day. May you always find light in your darkest moments, and may you always have loved ones beside you in every circumstance. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.